Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women. Performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen.
Welcome back, queens. We have a king in the house. We have Andrew. Andrew Dole is the owner of Body Fuel SPN, a sport performance and lifestyle nutrition practice in Castle Rock, Colorado. So Kara's already drooling. Colorado's her happy place. Specializing in endurance athletes and weight management. An active triathlete, certified executive chef, and triathlon coach, Andrew manages clients around the world combining nutrition science, behavior modification, and culinary expertise into powerful life-changing nutrition interventions or sport performance-driven plans.
A graduate of Metropolitan State University of Denver and earned a master's degree from K-State University, as well as a degree in culinary arts from the Art Institute of Colorado. Andrew is also a published sports dietitian on the topic of exercise-associated muscle cramping and works with a variety of corporate clients, cities, sports clubs, and community health initiatives. In addition to public speaking and private practice, Andrew has taught culinary and nutrition at the college level for over 10 years. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Oh, we're excited to have you. I kind of view Andrew as one of my go-tos because we're big science nerds, and he is one of those that will put it out there and debunk. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have Andrew on. So
I'm curious just how you guys two know each other. Is it just through the sports dietitian world?
Yeah, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Man.
Social media, it's like your BFF next door, but you've never met each other.
That's it. Like minds gravitate, and those that don't are compelling because you want to know why they think what they think. So you can't help but connect.
I love that opinion.
You can't grow and get any better if you don't listen to two sides of the coin perspective. So, and that's something I'll talk about kind of. Let's jump into it, Andrew. So recently there was an article that was posted that was talking about kind of how food can be just as powerful when it comes to fuel, and that potato can be performance enhancing. And of course I posted it because I'm like, oh yeah, look, people, you don't have to buy fancy supplements. And you were like, well, that's great in theory, but, and then I said, okay, I want to hear your side of it. So can you kind of share with some of the listeners your practical science-based rebuttal?
Yeah, so the article was actually saying that potato starch or potato was as good as a gel for endurance sport. And this was particularly cycling, which is very different than running. As we know, running is harder on the GI system. And for example, in triathlon, like we're really trying to maximize food intake on the bike because it's easier to digest. When we get to the run, that food intake is going to stop. And so when we look at that article that got posted all over it, and you weren't the only one that posted something about it, it doesn't really work that way. It's great in theory, but what got missed, and I think the bottom line is the quantity of potato that was actually necessary to get in the amount of carbohydrates someone would need. And so like a gel or a liquid sugar fuel is a very small amount of actual volume for a large amount of fuel intake and carbohydrates, pure sugar. But a potato is not that way. And so you have to eat quite a bit more. But you're also not just getting the sugar. You're getting fiber and you're getting protein and depending on what it is, some fat. So it's not isolated in sugar. So in order to get what you need, like the 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour or 60 grams to 90 grams per hour, depending on what it is, like those are kind of nice guidelines to orbit around, and they work very well. When we start adding whole food into that, now we're increasing volume. And I think everyone would agree that when you're exercising, at even sub threshold, like 60 or 70% of your VO2, like eating is not on the top of your mind.
Right.
And then if you go into like a harder effort, or let's say a longer effort, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 hours, when you're really taxing that GI system, like sitting on all that solid food is not awesome. So I published a 5 or 6 fact a little series on Instagram about whole food and like sport performance fueling, how we want to use engineered supplement products and whole foods together to maximize fueling, not rely on just one. That's where I think the science fell apart. They did like logistics and reality. And also, I'd like to say, so like I did a 50K this year training for a 50-mile ultra, and carrying sweet potatoes in my back was not, like if you're going to do a loop, like, okay, like a 10-mile loop, no problem. You could stop and refill. But I was doing, 12, 13-mile out and backs for a total like 20 something. Like, you don't want to carry all that. Logistically, it's not. And then we have a food safety issue, right? And so, well, actually, back to the weight. So we would buy the lightest vests. We get the lightest flask, the soft flask. We got the lightest shoes ever. And it's like, so we can reduce all this weight. And everybody wants to have this race weight, which is wrong, but we do strive to be lighter. Sure. Right, so we can go faster, but then we want to carry, water-soaked potatoes or solid food. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, no. I don't see that.
And it doesn't sound appealing either to eat.
No, like, it is kind of nice to change once in a while, but I have to admit, like, I was all sticky. Like, I carried sweet potatoes for a while because I really wanted to try to move it in, and then it was, like, on my face, and then I'm super sticky, and then my hands are dirty, and I'm, like, 13 miles in the woods with the amount of water I need to drink, not wash my hands. And you're like, this just isn't working. So, that opinion was born of like practicality, experience, working with athletes, especially in triathlon. Look, food safety is an issue. Like food cannot be left out for longer than 4 hours. It really shouldn't, especially any foods that are potentially hazardous. And that's not a term they use in the food service anymore. They've changed it to time temperature control, because potentially hazardous, like, oh, we don't really need that food. But the reality is that food has water activity or water content. It has protein, and those things will allow bacteria to grow. And when the pH is low or high, I should say, when we don't have a lot of acidity, there's nothing to curb bacteria growth. And so if you have a potato or baked or wet food like rice cakes, Alan Yim, I mean, I love the guy, but you're not going to run with these rice cakes or pack them in your carry-on bag for a triathlon and have them sitting in the heat for 4 to 6 hours and not think you're going to get some type of food poisoning. Right. So like there's another practical issue that's sort of like in a lab when you're getting tested, fed puree, sweet, but in real life doesn't work. No.
Yeah, thank you. And that was one of the reasons why we're going to kind of focus on the dairy is, Kara and I both work in the eating disorder realm, and then also like the sports and performance. And so I never want to try to usher my athletes one way or the other, but thinking practically like, okay, if you are 16 and you're doing 3 to 4 hours of activity a day and you've already had 3 stress fractures, how are we going to make sure that we optimize and get enough calcium? Or how are you going to be able to get enough alternatives in? So as the sports dietitian side of the hat, how do you incorporate dairy into your athletes' plans? Or if they don't want to do dairy, how do you work around that?
Yeah, I think you just nailed that right there. Is how do I incorporate it? Is one, are they open and receptive to it? Like, are you drinking and using dairy products now? And if so, great. Let's continue to do that because it's an incredibly valuable source of protein, vitamin D, calcium, carbohydrate. And by the way, it comes in liquid form, which we know for athletes who have a declining appetite. Like, and I say that being competitive athletes who are training hard, and this, the act of training that hard actually suppresses the appetite. It's not like the average, I don't want to call them weekend warriors, but they run 3 times a week or they go to CrossFit, which nothing against CrossFit, but that will rev up the hormones and they do get hungrier. But real 5 or 6 day a week, 8 to 14 hours of training per week can really suppress an appetite. It's hard to get those calories in, and liquid form is ideal. So I use it as much as possible when they're open to it. I ask the question, and it's on one of my sheets, like, do you have any food allergies? And then what is your food tolerance and belief system? Like, what's your moral and ethical food choices? To kind of get an idea. Are they plant-based? What does that mean to them? Because I just did a video on that. Like, that means something different to everybody. And or do they avoid milk? Do they have lactose intolerance? Do they think they're lactose intolerant, or are they potentially FODMAP? So I think it's a huge education piece to really follow up why someone isn't using. And then if it's clearly a lactose intolerance issue and we can identify it and it's not FODMAP, like they don't have GI distress from the fruits and vegetables they're eating, then hey, can we incorporate some lactose-free product? Like lactose-free milk is readily available and then still has all those great benefits we just talked about. Yogurt, naturally lactose-free to some extent because the bacteria feeds on it, so it's low in lactose, it's easy to digest. And then if they choose not to, like I just don't drink milk. I was just teaching a class yesterday, human nutrition, and it was a mixed group of college students with high school students. And they're like, I don't drink milk. And I'm like, why? Like, I just don't like it. Like, okay, no problem. Like, and so there your question is, and I have to say, Leslie Bonsi does a really great job of saying, you know what? You don't have to, but what are you going to replace all that amazing stuff with that you're not getting from the community standpoint? And I think there we start to look at, where am I going to get vitamin D? Do we have labs on vitamin D? Should we just supplement with it? Calcium comes in all forms. Like, I don't think that's particularly hard to get, but the leucine and the 20 grams of protein and enough calories and fat in a liquid form, like, okay, how do we replace that? And that's a good question, working within their diet. Like, what foods do you eat? What do you like? And then, being a chef and dietitian, we plan.
Yeah. Great. That leads me to kind of our second question. Are you seeing a shift in the dairy consumption with athletes that you've been seeing? What's some of their thoughts on it lately?
Yeah, so as my circle of athletes has expanded around quite a bit, I'm going to answer that question by saying it depends on what their belief system is. Because an individual, matter of fact, Dotsie Bausch, I was looking at your podcast, and I was looking at the last one, and I was doing some research on her, right? And so you have an individual like that who saw something that turned her away and now has a bone to pick with something, or her belief or ethical system, which is fine. Beliefs are great. Everyone's entitled to them. In that circle, and as I have athletes in that circle who are vegan, or have issues with industry, they will say, well, none of my friends drink or eat meat. Well, yeah, because you associate in that little community, right? And so within a subgroup, you will see, oh, yeah, well, they don't. And then another group where they don't believe that and they're omnivores and they eat everything. We're like, no, everybody does this. This is just what my entire team does. So I think it's very isolated. I can't answer that question. Do I see a decrease in milk consumption among athletes? No, I see some people less afraid to say they don't within their little groups that they stay in. And others are like, no, I love it. It's great. I don't want to give it up. So I think it's across the board. It's pretty even.
Ooh, I love that point. I'm always preaching about, like, look at the culture. So that's a great question to ask. Like, okay, within your realms, do you know of other groups that consume dairy and why? So kind of getting them out of their
versus their running group or like training group.
One has been, I've heard, okay, we're not meant to drink milk because the only time you do that is as an infant, so why would we drink milk from a cow?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure the dairy councils, if they ever hear this, are going to appreciate my answer, but I have one, and I just gave this yesterday, so this is awesome. Okay. So I'm going to ask you both ladies some questions. Okay, so I want you to name me a mammal that has put themselves into space. Just give me a number.
A mammal?
0?
Humans,
yeah.
Humans, exactly. And any other mammals that have put themselves into space?
Did they send a monkey?
But I think
we sent them. The monkey didn't send themselves.
Okay. Trick question.
It was us again.
All right, it is a trick question, right? Okay, so 0, us again. So how many mammals or animals do you know use cell phones, get dressed, drive cars, have refrigerators?
Yeah, that's just us.
That'd be kind of terrifying.
Right. It's just us. So, right. And so if we believe that as humans, we should do what other animals or mammals do, then stop doing all of those things, run around naked, don't drive your car and chase your food around outside, because that's the argument you just gave me. Right.
Yeah.
We're humans. So why do I drink milk? Because I can.
Like, I've seen where even piglets have nursed on dogs before, or another cow will end up taking on another calf.
They
so
figure it out.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I mean, they can even.
You don't hear that very often, do you? That was a great example. We're the only mammals to do that. Well, hold on a minute. We can cross. Yeah, so we're humans. That's my answer.
Yeah.
All right, the next one. Dairy increases inflammation, therefore it impacts an athlete's ability to recover.
If you're not allergic to milk, if you're not allergic to casein, whey, or the lactose, no, it's not going to cause an allergic reaction or systemic inflammation. And in fact, there are great studies that show dairy reduces inflammation, especially in certain groups that have metabolic disease. While that's not an athlete, it still shows that it's possible to have a beneficial effect or an anti-inflammatory effect for milk, not the opposite. Okay. So, yeah, and that's up there with phlegm. Like, if you want to just jump in there with that one, we're like, does milk cause mucus?
I've heard that when
oh my goodness,
people are sick, they'll decrease milk because it increases phlegm.
Yeah, right. So no, and I have to laugh, and this one I say this laughingly. If someone believes that milk produces phlegm, they're not allergic to milk. They're allergic to facts, because there are no peer-reviewed scientific literature journal, period. There is no literature, and it's been tested to support that there's a physiological function that milk helps or increases mucus production. Now, what can occur, and it's really reasonable, is that the viscosity and the way the suspension, the hydrocolloids, the protein, and the fats are suspended, that emulsion in the milk is thick and viscous. So if you happen to be a snotty person because you have allergies, or you have phlegm from an illness you're getting over, or you've just worked out, and you know how when we go out and run, we'll get the sticky phlegm stuck to the back of our throat because we're incredibly dehydrated. And you drink milk and oh my God, this feels like phlegmy. Yeah, because it's stuck to it, because it's thick and heavy. It'd be no difference than if you had a bruise on your leg. Yeah, I kind of know the bruise is there, but until I come up and kick it, you're not really aware.
Right.
And that's where I think milk gives people the perception that it increases milk. I think it makes them more aware of what was existing, but it has no science behind it.
Great.
All right, one more.
Okay.
Dairy can interrupt athletes' hormone levels, impacting their muscle development. Go.
Yes. Well, we have decades of very successful gold medal Olympians who have drank milk and beat everybody else. And so I'm going to say that their muscle development is not at issue. I think
he just mic dropped.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so no. That is not the case. I think it's quite to the contrary. We find again that, milk has a great leucine content. And from a science standpoint, what makes muscle growth, lean body mass, that mTOR signaling pathway, which I don't want to upjump your questions, is leucine. That is an incredibly important amino acid, and milk and whey have a ton of it.
But that's one thing I think people need to understand is foods will have some of these complete packages. And so you don't need to go buy your separate branched chain amino acids, your separate leucine, your separate, you can get this from dairy. And so that's why I was asking if whey protein continues to be the superior protein. I have seen a trend in my practice where they're starting to move away from it. And I'm like, why? It has stood the test of time in research and continues to be superior in turning that pathway on. So for listeners, that's the main pathway that generates new muscle synthesis and growth. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that signaling pathway, the mTOR, is a nutrient sensor. And so when we take in amino acids, It signals like, hey, let's start building or recovering or turning over. So we often think about lean body mass or muscle synthesis as only like, I'm going to build my quads or my biceps. It's really not the case. It's muscle tissue, period, all through the body. And our body is turning over muscle tissue consistently every day. And when we're an athlete, we're just causing that breakdown to be more intense because we're blowing up those fibers, we're breaking them down and rebuilding them, and or asking our body to undergo hypertrophy and grow them. And so that mTOR process, leucine and arginine are two really well-known stimulators, those amino acids, to help turn on that switch, kind of like a light switch, like, hey, it's time to start processing, this to create lean body mass to repair and or recover. When we look at whey protein, is it still the gold standard? If we compare whey protein to whole plant foods, I'm going to say yes, because whole plant foods typically are not rich in leucine. There are some peanut butter, soy, tofu, almonds, lentils, but comparatively speaking, you have to eat about twice as much to get the same amount of leucine that you would in a milk product or an animal product, for example. Okay, so like whey protein. A good example of that is soy milk versus regular milk. An 8-ounce glass of milk has 1 gram of leucine and 120 calories. Well, soy milk has a half a gram of leucine. So you'd have to drink twice as much at 105 calories, so you'd almost double your calories to get that same leucine content. And if we look at our other non-soy based foods, it's pretty much the same, right? I mean, we have to take that into consideration. Like science says, sure, you can eat enough plant-based foods to get an amount of leucine, but can you really? I mean, your primary audience is female athletes who their appetites can be large, but compared on the median, they're not as large as a male who can eat more food. Like some of your athletes at 5'4", 5'5", some of my athletes at 5'4", 5'5", like their calorie bucket just isn't that big. They don't have the body mass. And so to eat that much food is incredibly difficult. And I'd like to point out that like with some athletes, we have orthorexia and we have like overcompensation of trying to eat too healthy. That is actually a thing with female runners and male runners. Is like eating all of this salad, which is good for them, but there's no fuel in that.
Right.
Like there's not enough carbohydrates, there's not enough protein, there's not enough fat, but they're full because they ate lots of fruits and vegetables, which doesn't leave room for these other quality foods that they need, like that fuel. So back to the question, is whey superior? Whey protein is, in my opinion, a gold standard and a quality use supplement if we're looking at whole foods. Now, if we take a look at vegan or vegetarian supplement powders that have been specifically designed to include all of the branched chain amino acids and have a good leucine profile, then no, I can't in good faith say that at all, because there are some great vegan protein products out there that are blended specifically to match whey. And in that perspective, I have to say, well, if we're looking at whey content and that's what we're really worried about, then either will work. But they're also more expensive. They don't necessarily taste great. And so we have to look at practicality. Do you want to actually use that product? What's it mean to you? Where's your belief system?
Man,
Good stuff.
we're gonna have to have him on for a second one. I like you come with Arsenal.
Yeah.
I like to say I come informed, and that's it's helpful.
Well, but I think for so many, they just kind of shoot. I should quit using these euphemisms. Yeah. Sorry, we get kind of slap happy as we do our interviews, but I think so many people just take what they hear at face value and they start to form it as a belief without even being formed, and that can be pretty dangerous because then that could lead to their compromised health or trickle effect.
Of course, and then just the world we live in of like media outlets and constant just information, and you get an article about potatoes and I think just like our inundation of information, it's hard to weed out what is science and what isn't.
Right.
It is incredibly. Well, thankfully, there are podcasts like yours who want to at least present information so that someone can make an educated decision. And that's mostly important. I don't want anybody to listen to like, well, he said it, so I do it. It's like, well, this is what he said based on this, and let me go find that information and see and decide. And, social media gives us 6 seconds, as an entrepreneur and business owner like you, we're looking at, well, how do we get in front of our, what kind of social media stuff to do? Well, you got 6 seconds. So like, how do I put all this information in a 6-second blurb? Like, you can't. And that's one of the difficulties of it. And you mentioned, I think, as you led into that sentence, was context. Like, people take something because they've read it or someone else does it, but they completely lack the context for which that was used.
Right.
And context is everything, which
Absolutely.
I think if you were to boil context down to a non-scientific term, it would be the individualized needs of the athlete.
Sure.
Context, individualization.
Absolutely. And what works for them, for sure.
Yep.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things I always hone in with my athletes is that, okay, the changes that you have made, are they actually improving your performance, or did you just see that LeBron James started to do this, so now you're going to do it, and now your performance is hindering, but since it's LeBron, but you didn't realize LeBron was doing it because he wanted to improve this on his performance. Yeah. Everybody just kind of grasps at straws, but sorry, I kind of can get on my soapbox there.
Well, you should, because you opened up a really great point. Like, I just responded on LinkedIn to someone that I follow, Rachel Cheatham. She's a PhD who I'm saying you follow her too, right?
Yep.
And she posted something on White Claw. Well, I just interviewed the owner of Bravis Brewery. I stopped drinking 2 years ago because I wanted to. So I haven't had any alcohol in 2 years. But I do miss like the drinking component and like social aspect, and beer tastes good sometimes, right? So I'm experimenting and looking at with my clients and athletes that I find to have an issue with alcohol, or it's hurting their body composition or performance. How can we still enjoy this part of our life but find an alternative? And so he was telling me about White Claw, and I'm like, I don't know anything about this because they don't drink. And she just posted on it about how someone famous said it made me awesome, and now it's in demand so much that it's like no one can get a hold of it. Like, there's a shortage of this stuff. And Beyonce with watermelon water, and the whole compression sock thing, because it happened in basketball. Like, there's people do these things and they don't really know why.
Or my favorite, and then we'll wrap up, was when people started wearing those like oxygen mask. I remember one time this kid was running by our house and I was like, oh my God, because he saw like somebody on the NFL, and then all of a sudden everybody was wearing them. You know what I'm talking about? Like their altitude training in Missouri.
Yeah, was it the things that the firemen use, right? Doesn't it restrict the breath so that it actually causes their muscles to work harder so they can breathe through the respirators?
Right. So we need to do that when we're training for our 5Ks. Jeez.
No, we don't.
Whatever makes you faster mentally, like the placebo. I don't know. You're in the sports psychology. Like the chicken soup effect is huge, right?
Well, Andrew, in all those busy, fun endeavors, how do you balance out the Phit philosophy, performance, health, intellect, and taking some time for self?
I think it's the other way around. It's all about me and what I want to do and have fun. So people ask me, like, what do you do? I do stuff that's fun. I make sure that I compete in the sports that I want, and I go out and I do them because I like to do a thing well. So I make time for me, and then I think everything else, like my work and the jobs I take and the number of patients I schedule, are really around what I want to do. But and I say that, like, for example, like I didn't book any patients on Thursday for the last 8 months because that was my 6-hour running day. That was my long running day. And it was my mental health. I had the ability to do that. But I've also changed my lifestyle to accommodate that. Like, I don't, go on vacations every year because I've decided to not work that much so I can do other stuff to take care of me. And I saw that in my wife's health more than anything. A working woman who gets up at 5 a.m. and works 14-hour days because that's what she does. And she stays at a place for 13 years and is incredibly loyal. And all I can see is her health decline as she became more professional and took higher level jobs, and she gained some weight, and her thyroid sorry, my wife, like tilling all your stuff out there, but, she goes and gets her labs done and, thyroid's not right. And, like, hey, do we have Hashimoto's? What's going on? And it wasn't. You know what it was? It was the change in hormones from a lack of activity and really not taking care of herself. And we changed some things. I mean, hell, she lives with a dietitian and a chef, right? So we made some changes, goes back, and thyroid is back to normal, right? So the point being is that I don't really balance. I'm kind of selfish in the way that I do what I think is important for me. I mean, I'm only going to live once. And then the work stuff, I do what I love. And so, you got to make it happen. Like, I know that sounds like, well, I got a family and kids. I got kids and I got a family and stuff. And I've made the decision.
Yeah.
We love that. Well, Andrea, it's been a delight. We hope to have you on again. And thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate that. I got some questions for you offline.
You bet. All right. Bye, Queens. Today's episode is brought to you by yours truly. I'm excited to announce the releasing of my book, Finding Your Sweet Spot in Sport, Avoiding Relative Energy Deficit in Sport, also known as RED-S, by optimizing your energy balance. Be sure to follow me on social media or go to my website, www.beccamccombel.com, to find out when the release date is set and when it'll be on Amazon. Bye, Queens.
For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen.
And Hashtag Fit for a Queen.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.